Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I am delighted to talk and welcome back, actually, Dr. Özgür Koca. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the invitation.
Great to have you back. Now, today we're discussing Dr. Özgür's new book, Sadr al-Dīn, Qūnawī, The Key to the Unseen, a guidebook to Sufi metaphysics. Now, this is a new English translation of one of the most important and influential works in Islamic metaphysics, accompanied by Dr. Özgür's extensive commentary, making this famously challenging text much more accessible to modern readers. And we'll be exploring both Qūnawī's thought and why this remarkable work remains so important today. Dr. Özgür is Associate Professor of Islamic Studies and Philosophy at Bayan Islamic Graduate School. He is a leading scholar of Islamic theology, philosophy, and Sufism, and the author of several widely acclaimed books published by Cambridge University Press. Look in the description below for links to these works and other platforms. So, sir, can you introduce us to this work?
Yes, thank you. Let me start from here. So thanks for the opportunity, Paul. This is, in my view, an extremely important book for the reasons I will be talking about. Sadr al-Qūnawī is the key to the unseen. Miftah al-Ghaib is the name in Arabic. It's a guidebook to Sufi metaphysics. I think we can say that. Let's start with who Sadr al-Qūnawī is first. I think he is the foremost disciple of Ibn Arabi, on the one hand, and a scholar of hadith, so a highly trained scholar. Trained in the fields of kalam and hadith, especially hadith, he is pretty well known in his mastery of the prophetic traditions. Also a stepson, the stepson of Ibn Arabi.
Wow.
Therefore, there is that familiar relationship. I think this also gives him a chance to really observe Ibn Arabi, not only as a scholar out there, but also in his inner circle, in his private life as well. So he has an access to Ibn Arabi in this regard as well. A philosopher, as we are going to see, in my view, is a first-class philosopher, and a Sufi. I think these terms can be used to define him: a disciple, a scholar, a stepson, a philosopher, and a Sufi. He's quite a unifying character in this way. I mean, he's quite a unifying character, and one of the goals of his book, actually, to lead us to these unifying characters. He will call them Insan al-Kamil, the perfect human being, and I will talk more about that. And this is the perception of Sadr al-Qūnawī. Since Sadr al-Qūnawī is the foremost disciple of Ibn Arabi, and his work, Miftah al-Ghaib, is usually perceived as almost like a gateway, one of the most authoritative commentaries on Ibn Arabi's work. So Ibn Arabi is a very oceanic figure. I mean, he is vast, he is deep, multi-layered. And if you encounter with Ibn Arabi in his vastness, it's really hard to domesticate, really.
Yes.
There's a lot there, and it might require the lifetime study. And he also wrote a lot, like physically also. Some of his books are encyclopedias. So I think the main function of Sadr al-Qūnawī here is to give us a guidebook to Ibn Arabi, and very masterful and authoritative commentary. And this was his perception within the school in the following years and centuries. Look, there's a quote from Lami's Nefahat here. Sheikh Sadr al-Din, he says, was trained in the company and service of the master, Ibn Arabi. He thoroughly understood the master's words on the doctrine of the unity of Deen, al-Wujud, and interpreted them in a way that aligned with reason and Islamic law. Without examining his research and commentary, it is impossible to fully grasp the doctrine of the unity of being. So his perception by the following generations is pretty much like this.
Can I just, sorry, pause you a second? It's extremely helpful because I'm aware that a lot of Ibn Arabi's work, like Ibn Taymiyyah, interesting enough, we're not going to go there, was so voluminous or oceanic, as you put it, that to have someone to systematize it, organize it, channel it, or whatever the word is, into a coherent whole is an extraordinary service. But what was he? Did Ibn Arabi see him as his authorized interpreter? Did he almost have that role? Apart from being a stepson and everything else, did he have that role as someone who could speak for him, for Ibn Arabi?
I'm not aware of any explicit saying of Ibn Arabi about this, but I think we can say it safely that by the following generations, he was seen, he was perceived as an authoritative voice.
Right.
Not only one, perhaps, but in terms of his service, in terms of allowing people to see Ibn Arabi through some accessible lenses. I think he's providing us with a great service here. And but I'm not aware of any explicit saying of Ibn Arabi, like saying that this is my foremost disciple, just follow him and something like that. I'm not aware of any of that.
Okay, thank you. And
let me also just very briefly talk about some of his other works. He wrote a lot. This is a selected list.
Wow.
One of them is Ijaz al-Bayan. This is an extensive commentary on Surah al-Fatiha. So he worked in the field of tafsir as well. So he commented on Surah al-Fatiha from a very metaphysical perspective. This is like a metaphysical reading of the opening chapter of the Quran.
Right.
And there is this work, Sharh al-Asma, Asma'ullah al-Husna, which is a commentary on the 99 names of God. As we are going to see in the following slides, the divine names and their ontological understanding as relations between God and the cosmos will be quite central to this school. And there are books on, there's a book of this commentary, a very short commentary on Ibn Arabi's Fusus, and books on Hadith. A commentary on 40 Hadith, for example, Sharh Hadith al-Arba'in is a very important book to understand his relationship to Hadith tradition and how he reads them. And there is also this important book, Al-Murasalat. These are letters between Nasruddin Tusi, another very important figure of the era, and Sadruddin Qūnawī. They were writing each other letters in which they were discussing kalam and metaphysics, difficult questions. And these letters are available to us and waiting to be translated actually.
Oh, really? So obviously this is going to be your job, I suspect.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
And there are also books that he wrote for the beginners, practical spiritual advice, such as this Tafsirat. This includes practical spiritual advice. So he seems to be writing in many different fields and for many different levels. And this list can be extended, but I'm going to stop here just to give you an idea that how productive and how vast his scholarship is. Now let's look at the influence. These are some of his students, very, very important students. Maybe it's not well known now in the modern era, but in the traditional Islamic context, they seem to be playing an extremely important role. And also, within the Ottoman context, they have an extremely important influence on the Ottoman Empire, at state level I'm talking about here. They seem to have played a very important role in shaping the Ottoman state philosophy. I'll say more about this. But let's look at some of these names. Sadruddin Farqani, for example, his book, Muntaha al-Madarik, is a book in which he gives us a metaphysics of love, really, from the perspective of Akbarian metaphysics. So he's really approaching the question of love, divine love, God being the lover and the beloved, and love itself. And how do you apply the question of being, really understanding of wujud al-masdar, being itself, and how do you really approach the very question of love through the lens of being itself? Now, you're not perceiving God within the school. You're not only perceiving God as a being, but as being itself.
Mm.
Not only that, I mean, there's also a perception of God as a being due to the very fact that God is being itself. So you're combining the two. Usually the love theories, love theologies are done while perceiving God as a being. But what happens when you start perceiving God as being itself, and how they interpret divine love and love of the created order? And he's answering this question in books like Muntaha al-Madarik. This is Saadattin Farqani. Some of them are poets, such as Fahrettin al-Iraqi. This name here, Fahrettin al-Iraqi. He's a poet. Sometimes they express themselves in poetry. Fahrettin al-Iraqi is actually giving us a commentary of Fusus, Ibn Arabi's work, by writing poems. His lemaat, therefore, is quite important to understand how this whole generation is expressing and doing very, very important work. So Ibn Arabi is laying some groundwork there, and they're not stopping here. You're looking at actually a growing tradition, in my view. So they are exploring new areas with what is given by Ibn Arabi. And we can look at some names from the second and third generations. There are very important names here too. Al-Kashani wrote a very, very influential commentary on Ibn Arabi's Fusus. Again, Dawud al-Qaysari here, his Muqaddimah is an extremely important work in terms of understanding the principles of metaphysics within the school. He's writing a commentary on Fusus, Ibn Arabi's famous work, but he starts with an introduction, a very extensive introduction in which he lays the principles of reading Ibn Arabi. This is Dawud al-Qaysari. Also, he is, I believe, in Iznik back then, and in his madrasa, he's teaching this, and this madrasa is being sponsored by Ottoman Sultan Orhan. So there are relationships between these scholars and the early Ottoman sultans.
Right.
And this relationship will be very important, I believe, in terms of shaping the Ottoman state philosophy and Ottoman philosophy in general, such as the system of millah, right? Treating different religions as different groups. And I think things like that might, in my view, can be traced back to their influence on the Ottoman sultans. Mullah Fenari is another very important name. And he's the first Shaykhul Islam of Ottomans.
All right.
So he's the first Shaykhul Islam, the top religious authority among the Ottomans, and he is the second generation student of Ibn Arabi, really. So Mullah Fenari is his commentary on Sadruddin Qūnawī's Miftah al-Ghayb is called Misbah al-Uns. It's also an extremely important work. It's very deep. He's giving us this all-encompassing metaphysics, really. I mean, there. So these Sadruddin Qūnawī's book that I'll just translated is being followed by other commentaries. So they're writing commentaries on each other's works. So Mullah Fenari wrote that commentary. It's a very, very important commentary. I hope that rich text will get translated into English soon. And Qutb al-Izniki, another very important figure, and he's very close to Mehmed II, the conqueror of Istanbul. Within the Ottoman Empire, is one of the most well-known sultans, and Qutb al-Izniki is very close to him. I believe they're studying Fusus together. There are some indications of this in historical literature. They seem to be studying some of Ibn Arabi's works. We're talking about this highest level. So Qutb al-Izniki is very close with Fatih Sultan Mehmed, as Turks call it, or Mehmed II, or Mehmed the Conqueror. Mullah Jami is another figure here. He wrote a book, Durrat al-Fakhira, which is talking about where Kalam, philosophy, and Sufi metaphysics converge and diverge. He's actually giving us a map on important questions, where Kalam stands, where philosophical tradition stands, especially the peripatetic tradition, Mashai tradition, and where Sufi metaphysics stands. and he's taking positions, giving us a map. And sometimes you see him putting Sufi metaphysics pretty close to philosophical conclusions, sometimes agreeing with the Kalam conclusions, but he's actually telling us, when we talk about Sufi metaphysics, we are actually looking at a school in itself. I mean, we should treat this perhaps as a distinct school of Islamic thought. So Mullah Jami, and that book, by the way, was sponsored by Fatih, Mehmet II. So I think these examples just to, I believe, give an idea about the close relationships between these giant scholars and Ottoman state. Therefore, this will continue until now. And let me also say a few words about the global influence. So far, I spoke about his influence within the Ottoman Empire. But I think it cannot be confined to that only. Since
China.
Yeah, and since he's really giving us a guidebook to Ibn Arabi, I believe some of Ibn Arabi's influence can be attributed to him too. Especially if you read the Ottoman intellectual tradition, Ottoman metaphysical tradition, how they use Sadruddin Qūnawī's concepts and terms to read Ibn Arabi, and you can see why he's very influential. Now, wherever Ibn Arabi is influential, I believe part of it can be attributed to Sadruddin Qūnawī's reading. And the Ottoman Empire, I already spoke about Davud al-Kayseri, Mullah Fenari, and Kutbuddin Izdeki. Said Nursi is I also wanted to give an example from a contemporary figure. Said Nursi is a contemporary figure, 20th century, one of the most influential Islamic scholars in Turkey. There are many movements that trace their ideas back to him in Turkey. And if you read his writings, especially his writings on the divine names and his writings on how to read the cosmos as a multiplicity of mirrors on which the divine names are reflected ever-changingly, never-ceasingly. Also, the perception of human condition as being a comprehensive mirror to the names of Allah. So all of these can be traced back to Aquarian school. So he is giving an answer from an Islamic point of view, responding to modernity, but he is doing this by hearkening back the Aquarian school. So this is also a phenomenon we see a lot. Here's an example of, here's an example from Turkey, Said Nursi.
Yeah.
Not only in the Middle East, if you go to China, a place like China, we see this immense influence, massive influence on the Han Kitab tradition in China. And they're doing something quite interesting. This is a very important era in the Islamic, in my view, an understudied era in the Islamic history. They're writing books. These are Chinese Muslims and Chinese scholars writing books. And in that book, they're putting Islam in conversation with Buddhism, Confucianism, religions quite dominant in that region, Confucianism and Taoism. And since these religions already have very strong metaphysical traditions, they're using Aquarian tradition to put Islam in conversation with Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And they're producing immensely important works. And here, once you look at those works, you can see again, Ibn Arabi is playing, Qūnawī is playing, and that tradition, Aquarian tradition, is playing an extremely important role, especially in areas like this, where there's a challenge, there's a very strong metaphysical challenge. I think they're finding a very valuable source in the Aquarian tradition to respond to that. And you can look at, you can go to Iran, in the Persian-speaking world, someone like Mullah Sadra, in many ways, actually, is just assimilating what Ibn Arabi says in a different context, and then expressing it perhaps in a more philosophical language. He's adding to it too, but on the basic ideas, he agrees with Ibn Arabi tradition, the Aquarian tradition, and this Ishraqiyun, therefore, that school and Iran, a philosophical tradition within Iran, is under still today, I guess, is under the immense influence of Aquarian school. You can think of names such as Sayyid Nasr, for example, or perennialism, another example. I believe that school, someone like Frischer Schuon or René Guénon,
yes,
they seem to be under an immense influence of Aquarian tradition. Although their reading might be criticized here and there, yet the influence cannot be mistaken.
I don't want to get diverted, but the question is does that suggest that Ibn Arabi or his foremost disciple were perennialists? And I don't want to get diverted by that, but I think the answer is possibly no. But that's a subject, yeah.
Well, perhaps that's a topic for another day. It's an important topic, and we can talk about that. Yet, what I'm saying for now is that yes, there is an immense influence of Aquarian ideas on that school. Right. And Allama Tabatabai is another example. Even Khomeini was an avid reader of Ibn Arabi and Qūnawī, and that tradition. And Indo-Pak region, again, another example where you can see the influence greatly. It's, I think, enough to reach someone like Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, a very important reformer.
That really surprises me, the Shah Waliullah, because I'm aware that the influence of Ibn Taymiyyah on his thought, and you're also talking about the influence of Ibn Arabi. So these are very divergent traditions. Influence on this incredibly important, almost modern individual.
Yeah, he wrote a book on reconciliation of Ahmed al-Sirhindi, Imam Ahmed al-Sirhindi, also known as Imam Rabbani, and Ibn Arabi. There are some criticisms of Ibn Arabi and Ahmed al-Sirhindi, and he writes a book, and he actually tells them, you actually do not differ much. When someone like Ahmed al-Sirhindi says, La mashuda illahu, he's not actually saying like nothing appears except him. He's not actually saying something really different from Ibn Arabi. So he's trying to really put them in peace, and he's leaning towards Aquarian reading there. So there is that in Shah Waliullah Dehlavi. Also, he's an hadith scholar, therefore under the influence of Ibn Taymiyyah. I think one of the things we should realize, these figures are really very difficult to put in a cage. I mean, they're really hard to domesticate. It's this or that. I mean, you're looking at quite unifying characters. Yeah. So it's very normal for someone like Shaykh Waliullah Dehlavi, I believe, is to be under the influence of Aquarian tradition together with the Taymiyyan tradition. And they can reconcile because there's a very strong emphasis within the Aquarian tradition on hadith. And they're actually quite Zahiri, quite Salafi in their many approaches. Aquarian reading of the Quran is extremely literal.
Yes, this is something that really shocked me when I first heard that fact. But yes, you're absolutely right. It is very literal.
I think the convergences between the two schools are more than people usually
than you might suspect. Yes.
Yeah. And that's another topic for another day.
Oh, indeed.
And Muhammad Iqbal is another very important example of it. His poetry. Perhaps sometimes you don't see them citing Aquarian tradition. I mean, they don't put in their bibliography or in their references where I'm taking. But since certain ideas are so diffused in the culture, in the religious language, they may not even be aware of their origin. It's like saying, when in the Kalam tradition, you might use the word wajib al-wujud, which means the necessary thing, right? But you can trace it back to Ibn Sina. It's there. It's coming from this giant scholar.
Right.
You may not know this coming from there, but since it is so frequently used in theological language, in philosophical language, you may just borrow it from there without knowing. I think something like that is happening when it comes to Aquarian tradition.
Fascinating.
There are many ideas scholars use, language, concepts scholars use, sometimes without knowing the origin of those concepts and that language. Something similar can be seen within Sufi orders as well. Aquarian tradition cannot be, I believe, confined to one order, and Ibn Arabi didn't have an order. And these students of him, they're not really establishing orders. You're not looking at an order such as Qadriya or Naqshbandiyya, right? You're not looking at these orders, Sufi orders. what they do is actually, I think they're remaining a little bit above the orders, and they're providing the language with which almost all orders are expressing themselves. And that's probably why someone like Ibn Arabi is called the greatest sheikh, because of this influence. Kind of, you can see his influence on almost all orders in different ways, by providing the metaphysical word, expressions, language with which Sufism is expressing itself.
Right.
So if you put everything together, I believe we can see the massive influence of this school. In my view, influence of Ibn Arabi on Islamic culture, I think, can be compared to someone like a Ghazali or perhaps Ibn Taymiyyah. Or, I think he's one of the most influential figures.
I can agree. You've got Europe and the US, but is that coming on the next slide, or there's no name?
No, I just wanted to say, I think in the modern era, we are seeing this with someone like Henry Corbin or William Chittick's translations. And I think in the coming generations, we'll see this more. And Europe and US, the perennial school, as you mentioned, perennialism, traditional school with Sayyid Hussein Nasr, Frishor Schuon, René Guénon. And I think with figures like this, we're looking at that growing influence. Some of Ibn Arabi's writings are coming to Europe and US quite late.
But can I just query that? Because Sheikh Hassan Spiker, who's a friend and colleague of mine who co-runs the Blogging Theology Academy, he's, I think it's fair to say, very much an Akbarian scholar. But he's not a perennialist, unless I misunderstood
you.
You
don't have to be, it's not. Yeah. There are certain aspects of perennialism. Perhaps an Akbarian scholar doesn't have to agree. Yes, all I'm saying that they were influenced by Akbarian school. Not every reading of perennial school of Ibn Arabi can be defended. Maybe I think one can argue that sometimes they're not getting it right, but that doesn't preclude the influence. I'm just talking about how influential in many different schools. The perception of it might differ. One can argue.
I would just say, sorry,
I myself see myself as really influenced by Akbarian school, but I don't define myself as a perennial.
Well, I was just going to say, I appreciate we mustn't get diverted, but this issue has been raised several times now in your short presentation so far. Was Ibn Arabi a perennialist? Can you just say yes or no, or was that not a fair question to ask of a scholar?
No.
Okay. Well done for giving a one-syllable answer. I'm very impressed.
But this is a question I think that needs to be answered with more than a no.
I know. I think it's very unfair. It's just because we have raised it several times. I thought it's hanging in the air. I need resolution.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But thank you for
if I have time, perhaps I can just touch on it at the end of this slide.
Of course. Of course.
Okay. Now let's look at the book itself. The Key to the Unseen. The name is Miftah al-Ghaib. It's one of the most significant works in the history of Islamic metaphysics. Truly. And why? Because it systematizes and articulates Ibn Arabi's teachings in a metaphysical language. It gives us certain principles. It lists a list of principles, and I give them in the book. And after each principle, I try to also make it more accessible with a commentary. Sometimes they're not that clear. One needs a certain affinity, certain mastery of Ibn Arabi's readings to understand. He seemed to be distilling a principle from a large amount of writings. So this distillation of the principle, I think, also requires an ability to go back to where this is coming from. Now, that's what I tried to do in the book. That's why I'm also giving a lot of references and quotes from Ibn Arabi.
Can I ask, sorry to interrupt you again, this book you've written, which basically is what we're talking about, is it just for other scholars, or could an educated layman basically read it and benefit from it? In other words, who is the audience?
I think the audience is, as Qūnawī puts it, are the elect of the elect. This is a book which is accessible to people who can think abstractly, in a way. I mean, who can really master metaphysics. Metaphysics is not always easy. Perhaps cannot be taught to everyone, and they accept this. But there's an audience for this. And the book itself, since it is heavy, I mean, just naturally, may not be accessible to a large group of people. But
yeah. I actually meant your book. I know we're talking about another book. I'm sorry to confuse you. I should have been clearer. That your book, which is an explanation of and translation and commentary on the work we're now looking at on this slide, is your book aimed at scholars or to the educated lay person as well?
Not only for the scholars. I think I wanted to make it accessible to an undergrad at least. I mean, you don't have to. So someone who is willing to
make the effort,
make sense, or willing to understand and spend some time.
Right.
I just wanted to help that reader.
Right.
With some background in philosophy, maybe, with some tendency towards philosophical thought and metaphysics. Also, with some tendency to spiritual life, because within this domain, spirituality and philosophy is really hard to separate.
True.
Because they think a virtuous life makes you a sharper thinker.
Yeah.
Because how you think really influences how you live, but also vice versa. How you live really deeply influences how you think.
Exactly. And that holistic attitude is lost in a lot of Western philosophy, particularly since the Enlightenment, where it becomes so cerebral, it's not really holistic anymore. It becomes an intellectual pursuit. Whereas this philosophy is a deen, is part of the deen, a whole way of life.
It is a way of life, truly. So here we see metaphysics as a way of life. It's not only that one can express himself conceptually, but also it is very important that one experiences it. In someone like Qūnawī, I believe we can say this. It's very, it's difficult to, tell who to admire more. The one who knows how to express, or the one who experiences.
Interesting.
This is really, and that's their goal, really, to bring the two together, both nazar and mushahada. Nazar means to be able to think deeply with intellect, to be able to use the concepts properly with logic and all of that methodology, to go from the proof to the proven, right? The logical design argument, and you name it. So there's a lot of that in Kalam tradition, and they are admiring it. They want to master it too. But there's also something else, and that is that you can wake up to the real, and there is that methodology too, and there needs to be an experience of that as well. So knowing God is not just knowing things about God, knowing concepts about God. So we may know a lot about God, but that is different from knowing God. Hence, there's that experiential dimension to it. And they seem to have this desire to bring the two together, these two domains together, to bring the two seas, as sometimes they express it, two seas together.
Oh, sea, not seed, sea, S-E-A, as in ocean.
Seas, yes. To be a barzakh where the two seas meet.
Fascinating.
So it systematizes and articulates Ibn Arabi's history. I think this makes it a very, very influential work. So this is how the book starts. Let me say a few words about the content of the book. It starts with a classification of the sciences. And as you might guess, metaphysics will be seen as the most noble science. Why? This seems to be the reason. While other sciences focus on particular beings and their relations from specific perspectives, metaphysics addresses being itself, or aims to understand being itself. This is a very important distinction.
Yes.
So this seems to be the reasoning here. other sciences, think about math or physics or economy or biology. Biology studies beings from the perspective of their being live organisms, right? So it looks at the beings and studies them from a specific perspective. Chemistry does something else. It has its own specific perspective and studies interactions between molecules, particles. And physics looks at the question of particles, really. So atoms. So you're looking at beings. When you study atoms, when you study stars, when you study trees. So you're looking at different beings. But you don't have to ask, really, to be a very good physicist. You don't really have to ask the question of being itself. It's there. You don't have to be a metaphysician to be a good physicist or to be a good chemist, really. Because you're kind of limiting your senses, and you're just looking at beings walking around, and even there, you're narrowing it down to a particular question, and you're really studying, you're really isolating yourself from the vastness of it, vastness of the reality, and you're looking at a particular question, and you're studying beings. All sciences are doing this, but they don't ask the question of being itself.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's a tree here, and there's a reason I especially picked a tree as an example. Because Descartes, as you might know, talks about this as well. And he says metaphysics is about the roots of the tree, right?
Yes.
Remember the roots of the tree, and the physics is the trunk, and the branches are different sciences such as medicine, such as biology, and there are leaves and fruits. They're like consequences of these sciences. And he talks about the whole sciences along these lines. But Descartes' vision of metaphysics here is still narrow from the perspective of Islamic metaphysics, because we're not talking about the roots of the tree. We're not even talking about the soil through which these roots are embedded. We're not even talking about the air this tree is breathing in.
Yes.
We're talking about being itself.
Yes.
The whole tree.
I think
what makes that tree an existing being? Being
exactly.
itself. So, yeah.
No, it was just what you're saying is so fascinating, and it reminds me of in my view, when the rot set in the Western philosophical and theological tradition with Duns Scotus. He was a Scottish theologian in the 13th century. His whole idea of the univocity of being, the idea that the concept of being, what you're talking about, applies in the same way both to God and creatures, actually. Yeah. And this was immensely as an innovation, because Thomas Aquinas before him could speak of the analogy of being. You could say God exists in some sense analogous to us as creatures, but you couldn't say we shared the same conceptual, the same concept as God. So Duns Scotus had a huge influence downstream. He didn't intend this, but downstream in the advent of modernity and secularization of knowledge and the dethroning of the queen of the sciences, metaphysics. God then becomes a being in the universe. Well, where is? I remember the allegedly when the first Soviet astronaut went into space, looking around saying, where is God? I can't see God anywhere. He's mocking the idea of God being out there in space, which of course, from an Akbarian point, or Islamic point of view, I should say, or even St. Thomas Aquinas's view, is an absurd observation. Because we're dealing here with being itself, not God as a being within the universe like other creatures.
Precisely. I mean, all of that, possibly most of atheistic thought is starting with an assumption about that.
Yes, precisely.
They start with an assumption that God is a being out there. They usually also assume a monarch-like being, right? And then they fight with that idea.
Exactly.
And what they reject is a God who is a being. But from within the Akbarian perspective, I believe then we can see this within the Christian thought as well, due to the Islamic influence, probably with Thomas Aquinas, right? He seems to be moving in the same direction when he describes God as pure being or active being, actus purus and things like that. So there is that. but there's also divergence. You can see this in Descartes' description. He is forgetting the question of being. He's kind of reducing metaphysics to a very narrow domain, just the roots. And probably, in my view, and I'm writing another book about this, I'm putting Ibn Arabi and Kant into a conversation.
Kant? You say Kant?
Yeah.
Really? Oh my goodness me, that's very interesting.
I finished the first draft, and the book, inshallah, will come out probably towards the end of this year or perhaps early 2027.
That is, is it mainly to do with the critique of pure reason, presumably, that you're going to be?
Critique of pure reason and the possibility of knowing God. So, as you might know, Kant is putting God in the domain of noumena, and then our cognitive faculties, since they filter reality necessarily, and there really is no reach, and kind of securing us from the possibility of certainty in belief. So I'm putting Ibn Arabi and Kant into a discussion, and there again, look, what Kant is rejecting an idea of metaphysics, but that idea of metaphysics can be traced back to someone like Descartes, is a very narrow view of metaphysics. And Kant's entire tradition, and after him, like someone like Hume or Leibniz, they all seem to be functioning within a framework, unquestioned framework. And that ontological framework is coming with a lot of limitations in theological and philosophical discovery. I
can't wait to read this book, actually, and inshallah, you'll come back on Blogging Theology to discuss it. I can't think of a more interesting subject.
Inshallah. So this being itself, this question of being itself should be understood very carefully, I believe. And a lot of times when we look at the criticism of Ibn Arabi and Akbarian tradition, they also seem to be missing this very essential distinction between beings and being itself. What they have in mind when they say wujud. It's not a mawjud. A mawjud is a being. But wujud is being itself. And the metaphysics is the science of realizing this, knowing it. Sometimes it's about waking up to it. And it's not only about knowing something, discovering something new, but this is a reality we all experience. You are saying, I don't see God, right? That those guys, right, saying, but from the perspective of Akbarian metaphysics, in fact, you cannot not see. Atheism is an impossibility, really, because the first thing you know before any other concept is the awareness of being. This is being itself that is precognitively evident to you. It is not a cognitive mechanism. We are not producing it after a series of cognitive mechanisms or structure, but we are every cognitive method, everything from causality to space and time. They are functioning within the horizon of being itself.
That's almost assimilatable to Kant's critique of pure reason, isn't it? Synthetic a priori. It's something that you can actually observe and deal with empirically, but it's an a priori intuition. It's not. This
is going deeper. That's what I'm arguing.
Yes, exactly.
This is going deeper. It's not It's not even that category of a priori structure in mind. That doesn't do justice to the evidentiality manifest.
Not even Arabi's sense. Yeah. Absolutely. It's an interesting response to Kant. So this is why I'm fascinated to read your book.
Yeah, and I'm looking at all these issues, space and time and causality, the cognitive structure, and this a priori structures in mind and experience. So I am really putting the two into a dialogue.
Fascinating.
And I'm arguing that there are ways to go beyond Kant.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Okay. And metaphysics here will also be seen as a universal science. This is universal because really being itself is the most universal thing. You cannot step out of it, really. There's nothing more universal than that. Imagine that you stepped out of it, but you need to be an existing thing to step out of it. You need to still within the domain of being itself. So there really is you cannot doubt it. Because to doubt it, as Descartes also saw, right? You need to exist.
The very act of doubting proves that there is a doubting subject, which means cogito ergo sum.
Precisely. Actually, from the perspective of Akbarian metaphysics, Descartes is doing something quite unnecessary there, because when he says, "I think, therefore I am," everything is actually hidden within the first "I" there.
Yes. Yes.
Because you cannot say I without an awareness of being itself. So there's a lot that I think we can put these modern philosophy into dialogue with Aquarian metaphysics. And there's a lot can be done in this domain. And I'm just giving some entry points, I guess. So look, metaphysics whose subject is the real. Now we're coming to metaphysics as a study, as a science, as a study of the divine essence, God, the real, al-Haq. And in this book, God will often refer to as the real, al-Haq. So metaphysics.
So just to pause, people don't know. I don't imagine anyone's watching this doesn't know, but this is the name of. This is one of the attributes of God in the Quran. This is not just some random philosophical term.
No.
God is actually called al-Haq, the truth or the real, or however you translate it in the Quran itself, numerous times.
Precisely. Yeah. So metaphysics whose subject is the real encompasses everything, just as it encompasses all knowledge. Why? Because you may be studying physics and you may be studying chemistry, but really, being itself, I mean, you cannot really truly study beings without being aware of being itself, really. You may not be noticing this, as if, there's light in the space, right? Light, we don't see light usually, right? Like we don't see light, we can't see it. I mean, not usually, we cannot see light. But when I see you, when I see the screen, light should be present here. It's not visible to us, but my eyes sees light first before they see you.
Right.
When you take light away, no vision, no color.
Right.
It's as if looking at the mirror. When you look at the mirror, something quite, and this is an example also we can find in Mustafa Ghaib. When you look at the mirror, you don't see the mirror itself if you don't pay attention, but you see the image. I mean, say you were forgetful of the mirror is there. You may be just looking at the images walking around, like images. But whenever you see the image, you are actually seeing the mirror too, without perhaps noticing it. You just need to wake up to this reality that in every perception of the image, mirror is present. Actually, it precedes the perception of the image there. Or you may be looking at letters without seeing the ink. That type of, you just need to wake up what is already there. And metaphysics can be understood as a science of this, as the science of waking up.
So just to translate this into banal language, these are all metaphors for the God's presence is somehow behind, if I can use that word, behind that exterior empirical reality that we observe. So there is a depth to it, an interiority or a metaphysical dimension, whatever language, that is not normally noticed in our perhaps very dunya-centered empiricist mentality, the paradigm of this is all that there is, looking at the physical world around us. But you're saying just beyond that, just behind that, is being, and this being is, in other words, God or the real al-Haq. Is that what you're...
Precisely. So paying attention to the presence of being itself opens up, I think, treasures in terms of theological, philosophical thinking, and this is one of them.
I mean, this is where I must raise a slight flag, because I know if anyone's watching this, people will be watching this, who is not sympathetic to Akbari metaphysics. Is this not an incipient pantheism?
I'm gonna come to that, actually. There are some slides that I will be talking about this very easily. Pantheism, dualism, deism. What is this real?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'll be asking that question.
Okay, great.
So metaphysics whose subject is the real, therefore, is the study of the divine as the real as being itself, but also as a being, because we are going to perceive the real through ourselves as a being too. So there's also a place for that, but within a larger framework. So what Kant say, let's go back to Kant or someone like that, they use terms like ens realissimum, right? The most perfect being, right? So what Kant sees as the ultimate vision of God actually is the secondary or another, like a lower level perception of the divine. the being itself, God as being itself, is a higher perception, higher realization.
I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
And once you put it in this category, every science seems to be functioning within the largest framework of being itself. And therefore, every science is a branch of metaphysics. Say, math is studying being to the extent it is quite quantifiable in beings. Physics is studying being to the extent beings are in relationship with each other in causality. Or biology is studying beings within the larger context of being itself from a different perspective. So all sciences are functioning within this largest frame. And there are some names that he uses to describe this science, and these are quite telling. Sometimes in the book he refers to this as the gnosis of God. I know the term Gnosticism might have some negative connotations within Christian context, but here let's assume the connotation is positive, and he gives the word more positive. So that I think it's okay to translate it as gnosis. Gnosis of God, ma'rifatullah, or you may say knowledge of God, like knowing God. So this is a way to know God. And this is also a way to love God, because you cannot not love when you know it. To know is to love. And you can see the Sufi here, because in most Sufi manuals, written in the earliest centuries till now, actually, there are maqamat and ahwal, right? There are states and stations in most Sufi manuals. The final station is usually described as state of muhabba, state of love of God. Sometimes they also put the state of uns, which means friendship with Allah, or wali, that type of. I think in that stage, in this final stage, you kind of bring together knowledge and love together, and also action on it too. So metaphysics here is being attached to one's spiritual elevation, growth, because it is the way, or a very efficient way, if you think about it, to attain gnosis of Allah, ma'rifatullah, and also muhabbatullah, because the more you know, the more you love. And vice versa. Certain knowledge of Allah can be open to you, or can be accessible to you when you love. Therefore, you can also say to love is to know. And these are coming together, and metaphysics is not an academic exercise here, as you can see. It's not only an academic exercise as we see nowadays in some lonely corner of an university corridor somewhere. And also sometimes the name becomes the science of realization, ilm al-tahqiq. So the Sufi here becomes a metaphysician and becomes a muhakkik, and the name will stay within the Islamic tradition, a realizer. And within the specific context, it means someone who knows, someone who loves, someone who experiences, but also someone who can express it with within the highest scientific standards, metaphysics. Is this making sense?
It is. No. So far.
Ilm al-tahqiq. So al-muhakkik, the realizer, the term will come from here. In fact, there's a nice story between Rumi. Rumi, as you might know, is a lover, right? Poet. And they knew each other with Qūnawī. They are both from Konya. The name Qūnawī comes from Konya, from Turkey. So they actually live very close to each other. They were from the same city and the same era. They knew each other, and sometimes they came together. And one day, the leader of that the leader of that area, the Konya city, it brings them together, and they're asking Rumi to lead the prayer. And Rumi says, "I'm not a muhakkik.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
I'm an abdal. I'm a lover. Qūnawī should lead it."
Yes, yes.
Am I making sense? So
I've heard this story before. It's very good. Carry on.
You know, he kind of sees he has something extra, something more. Another way to look at this, there are some quotes here. Metaphysics is the most honorable sciences due to the nobility of the subject, and the subject is the real. And the real is pure being, wujud al-mahz. I think certain, we're going to come back to this. And the real is pure being in which no contradiction is found. So this statement, the real is pure being, God as being itself, study of the real as being itself will be an important one. Where is this coming from, you might ask? There are some precedents of this in Islamic philosophy as well, in Ibn Sina, someone like Ibn Sina.
Yeah.
It's coming from the distinction between existence and essence, as they sometimes put it, between existence and quiddity. So, look, here I am, there you are. We are beings, right? We all have our own essence, our own whatness. I am Özgür and you are Paul. We are distinct beings with our own specific whatness, and that's called mahiyya. But we also exist. We are being given being, therefore we can exist here as a distinct being. But when you come to God, you can't really do this. If you say God has an essence and God is receiving being from somewhere else, you're undoing the divine transcendence. Because God is not the absolute now. There's something else, a larger context. And therefore, this cannot be done. Also, you're drawing boundaries to divine essence when you talk about divine nature, when you talk about essence. So how do you then resolve this problem? God's essence is pure existence. This is how you solve it. And the same conclusion will be reached by, as I mentioned, Thomas Aquinas and others too. And this is being accepted by Sufi metaphysics, basically. The distinction between essence and existence is no longer in the divine.
No, because God's not a contingent being; He's a necessary being.
The moment you ascribe an essence which is waiting to be existentiated, you're really going against the absoluteness of the divine.
Yeah,
that's the absolute ground. Nothing precedes being itself. Hence, the real is pure being, wujud al-mahz, sometimes wujud al-mutlaq, they will say. And it seems to be coming from this conviction. And Sufi metaphysics is agreeing with Islamic philosophical take on the divine essence. But they will do a lot of, they will go from here, they will go to different places. They will also, but in this main point, there seems to be an agreement. Actually, this agreement can be seen also in people like Ghazali, in my view, especially in his later works, in his Mishkat al-Anwar, when he describes God as pure light, or Nur al-Anwar, or light of lights, and when he talks about light of being, Nur al-Wujud, and all of that. Now, let's go. Therefore, metaphysics is the study of the being itself, is the real, is the study of the real, but it doesn't stop there. There is also the study of the world in light of this. So all of these matters, he says, ultimately return to two things: the knowledge of the real's connection to the world, and the world's connection to the real. And what can and cannot be known through these relationships. So metaphysics is also the study of the real and its relationship to the world, or the study of the relationship between God and cosmos, or the study of the real as being itself and every other being. And therefore, the term relationship will be an important one, nisab, here, and then this will bring us to the doctrine of the divine names within this particular school. Divine names usually understood, as you already mentioned, Al-Haq is a divine name. Ar-Rahman is a divine name. And the Quran and the Sunnah, right, they're giving us a plethora of divine names. You just read the first chapter, the opening chapter of the Quran, right? Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. You were already given like 7 names.
Yeah.
Right? Alhamd there, right? Allah there. And then Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, right? Rabbul Alameen, Ar-Rab is there. Maliki Yawmiddin, Al-Malik is there. So the Quran is giving us a plethora of names. Perhaps this is quite unique to Islamic tradition. And in other traditions too, you might find similar conceptions. But when it comes to Islamic tradition, there is truly a plethora of the divine names given in the revelation itself. And Om is a divine name too, one can argue. But within the Islamic tradition, there is that richness. And now, within the Akbarian school, divine names are not only some liturgical tools. In some Sufi orders, they are still being used as liturgical tools. Say, you have some issues with anger management, perhaps you can repeat the name Al-Latif this many times, hoping that that's going to make you a calmer person, right? A more serene person. So there's that. And in the Quran, a lot of the time the Quran ends certain verses with the recitation, with the repetition of certain divine names, as if there's an issue and there are certain names that are being reflected, becomes manifest in that specific context. So you should read them. And for the specific tradition, divine names gain ontological meanings. They are describing the relationships between God and the cosmos. They are describing the relationships between the God and cosmos. And since the number of those relationships is infinite, the divine names are also infinite. The number of divine names is infinite.
Let me ask you, how do we know they're infinite, given that a finite number is mentioned in the Quran? You see what I mean? There's not an infinite number of names mentioned in the Quran. How do we know that they are?
The possible relationship between God and the cosmos is infinite, because this is because of the divine infinity. And to say God is infinite is to also talk about all possibilities, infinite possibilities. And these infinite possibilities are being realized, are being actualized. Hence, this never stops. And there is always new creation. And there is no repetition in creation. Hence, these names are being revealed at all times. Yes, we have given names, and we can use them to decipher the sacred language of the world. This is what I mean. Look, let me give you an example. There's a cup of water here, right? There's a cup of water. And let's try to read this cup of water like described here. Look, there are many names that is being revealed here. You can see, and you can read the name of Ar-Rahman, say, the compassion, because someone who's giving me this water should have compassion towards me, one can say, I believe, quite safely. There is Rahma in this, there is love in this, there is generosity in this, Al-Kareem. Someone who gives me this is generous. You can read all the names that implies moral qualities, these beautiful moral qualities. You can read names such as implying qudra, implying power. Because to create something like this requires almost infinite amount of power, because this cup of water is truly, if you know physics and astronomy, is kind of a distilled drop from the whole universe. Our sun is not old enough to synthesize oxygen, heavy metal, heavy elements, and they're coming from distant stars. Now, towards the end of their life cycle, stars explode and supernova explosions, right? And some of it came here. As if when I'm drinking this cup of water, I'm touching, so to speak,
all of that cosmic background,
corners of the universe. As if this is like a distilled drop. These atoms in this cup, they were at once in distant corners of the galaxy, in distant corners of the space.
Yes.
Space, thus we are, right?
But you see, although I can see that's a very noble and poetic and it overlaps between poetry and physics and cosmology and theology, but there are much less noble examples where I struggle to see a manifestation of the divine names. Very rude, apparently very humble things like a stone or a tiny insect, for example.
Yeah.
How is one to see that? Because the examples you give are very ennobling, but there's not necessarily anything ennobling about dirt, or is it something very pedestrian?
There's from the perspective of the school, it's very possible. I mean, look at an insect. I mean, there's life there. There is an immense amount of consciousness in it, like creation of it, right? It requires knowledge. All the names about divine knowledge, knowing God, conscious God, intelligible God, implying knowledge, can be seen in that mirror of the bud, if you will, as if they are being reflected in that mirror. You can see that it wants to stay in existence. You can see that, he's being given food, a razak, right, the provider. You can see that. I mean, you can read the whole universe. You can look at a rock and read a lot of names. I mean, the distance between the existence of a speck of dust and its non-existence is infinite. You can look at a speck of dust.
Well, you mentioned a rock, but please elaborate how then you would describe
the power. I mean, you can try to look at the rock, like the details and the elements in it, all the laws governing the behaviors in that small rock, all the atoms acting in accordance with those laws. And every being, I mean, you can see immense power. And this, by the way, a rock might be a narrower mirror, so to speak. Perhaps we are very comprehensive mirrors as human beings in ourselves, and that, by the way, is where the theory of Insan al-Kamil comes from. This whole universe is a multiplicity of loci, multiplicity of mirrors on which divine names are reflected. But human beings have a more comprehensive reflection, if you will, a more comprehensive manifestation. We are more comprehensive mirrors, so to speak. That's why, according to Akbarian reading, the Quran, when he talks about creation of Adam, it says, we taught Adam all the names. This is from the first pages of the Quran. When it talks about the creation of Adam and its status above the angels, right? It says this very interestingly, and the Akbarian reading here is the following. This universe, or angels, they are also, in their own limitations, they also reflecting the divine names. But when it comes to Adam, there is this comprehensiveness, and that's waiting to be realized by us. In Adamic state, there's a comprehensiveness. There's a more comprehensive relationship with the divine names.
I understand.
There are certain things that we are maybe not proud of, but certain things perhaps is making us more comprehensive. Say, our ability to fall is actually giving us an access to divine forgiveness. Perhaps a rock might not have that type of access, but we can know God in His forgiveness because of our freedom, because of our comprehensiveness. Am I making sense?
Yeah, it just reminded me to something. It's not exactly a parallel, but in the Christian and Jewish tradition of the Adam and Eve made in the image of God. So what does that mean? Made in the image of God? And there's a very rich discourse about what that means in the Judeo-Christian tradition. There isn't just one meaning. There's different interpretations of that image of day in the various traditions. But I see something similar there, because there's a reflection in their language of the image of God, in your language of the divine names, in a fairly comprehensive way in the human being. So I see a parallel there to some extent.
Yeah, I think the same language exists there too. Imago Dei, right? There is that being an image. I believe that's one of the key messages of the revelation that was given to other Abrahamic faiths too, and it finds its one expression within the Islamic tradition. Then I see no contradiction. I see a continuity there. But one distinction can be made, perhaps, within the Islamic tradition, and this is true for the Akbarian tradition and for the large part, I think, for the Sufi tradition too. Think about things like sexuality, right? So within Christian monastic tradition, and for the most part, I believe, medieval period was defined by this attitude, desert fathers and mothers. There's this search for perfection in isolation. Say you're practicing celibacy to be a perfect man. I think this goes back to the example of Jesus didn't get married and things like that. But within the Islamic tradition, the perfection model changes. That's the Prophet ﷺ now. And the Prophet ﷺ is a more comprehensive mirror, because his being is not only in asceticism, although he lived quite an ascetic life, one can argue, right? He fasted a lot, he lived in a small mud hut. And there's that dimension in the prophetic model. But there's also a dimension in which, he's getting married, having kids, a father, a husband, leading armies, right? There is a comprehensiveness in the prophetic practice. Therefore, although we both perceive human beings as image of God, what that image means and how to realize that image-like quality differs. Islam seems to be offering a more comprehensive, and things like sexuality, therefore, is not seen as a predicament. Actually, they are seen as tools to realize that comprehensiveness. Am I making sense? So this type of comprehensiveness in the message of Islam, in the perfection model, we can make a distinction here, I guess. But the language, I believe, is shared by Abrahamic faiths, but also you can see this in Neoplatonistic tradition, or in arguably in Hinduism and Buddhism. There is this perception of human perfection in its ability to assimilate the divine qualities. So, look, divine names, and I was talking about this cup of water. I think this quote here can help us. Can we go back to the slide?
Sorry.
So the real manifests himself in each being according to that being's reality, according to that being's essence, one can say, that being's whatness, on behalf of its reality and relation to it. So divine names here is quite important. So when a being is created, when an essence becomes existentiated, this also means manifestations of the divine names. This self-delimitation, if you will, is giving us the divine names in their infinite variety. So we are watching the world, we are seeing the world as a manifestations of the divine names in His majesty and in His mercy and in His beauty. So God is the creator. God is the creator of a mother's heart on the one hand, but also God is the creator of a tsunami, a galaxy, all the rigorous stuff too. It also goes back to the divine majesty. So whole world, if you learn how to read, can be seen as a multiplicity of.
They're not the negative names, because that would be wrong. But in terms of what we perceive as catastrophes, negative experiences, hurricanes, or even supernova exploding, and so on. What names are instantiated then? These names of rigor, perhaps.
So, I think one can do that. The names of vigor, the names of majesty can be seen there. Sometimes the names related to justice can be seen. Sometimes we can also we should also keep in mind that since the divine names is infinite and the divine essence is infinite, perhaps we cannot exhaust its totality. Certain questions might just be unanswered, and we may not be able to read all the names. So you're looking at a rock, say, right? Perhaps in that small rock, or you're looking at an ugly thing, you can think, right? You're looking at that thing, a heap of trash. You're looking at that thing, and then you're perhaps seeing something quite ugly, right? Perhaps you're not be able to, from your own, from the perspective of our own narrowness, we may not be able to see what really is going on.
Yeah. I think of names like the Destroyer, the Bringer of Death. Is a divine name. Yeah.
We perhaps that's another name. Al-Mumit is one of the names of God. The Bringer of Death. So there's that. The Avenger is another name.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are names like that. But sometimes where we see ugliness, other things might see beauty too. I'm gonna say, look at that heap of trash. It might look ugly to me, but it's a heaven for a cockroach. Something like that. I mean, so
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we may be judging things from our limited
an exclusively human point of view, rather than other species actually. There's dung and so on. The famous flies liking things.
And another thing is
it's delicious.
Another thing that things like heaven and hell also, they can be seen as manifestations. Say hell as a manifestation of divine justice. Perhaps the names al-Muntaqim, right? The Avenger, it will manifest itself. That possibility within the divine essence is actual, and it will manifest itself. Therefore, actually, from this perspective, heaven and hell are kind of a necessity. I mean, you can go from here, you can go to a type of eschatology too. There's actually a necessity, because divine names in their fullness are waiting to be realized, or they're already realized. Nothing is waiting in the divine essence, by the way. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like the world is being created because something is waiting to be realized in the divine essence. They don't go from here. We don't go there. Yet, I mean, we are here because everything is actual in the divine essence, or everything is perfectly realized already in the divine essence. So divine names are quite important, not only to understand the world, but to read the world as a sacred book. It's kind of giving us, once you master this, like imagine you're turning this into a habit, right? Let's say you're looking at this cup of water, and after some practice, you turn this into a habit. And now you know how to read the world from the perspective of divine names. So a tree now is not only a tree, but it's more than it appears. A tree now is a mirror. So I think this is helping you to develop a very intimate relationship with the surrounding environment, with biophysical nature, with other beings. It's a very relational world.
It is. If often people have said about the West, there's been the desacralization of our experience of life in the West, with the increase in materialism and scientism and so on. But this perspective, it would very much kickstart a resacralization of our experience of the world if one reads it in this way.
Precisely. It's a very relational, it's a beautiful world. Okay, I think I need to speed up a bit. Okay, then he gives us certain principles. These principles that he gives us are around 50. But I'll just give some examples. One of them is the following. A thing cannot produce an outcome entirely different or contrary to itself. This is a principle that he gives on page 20. And then this principle is followed by this. Nothing can bring into existence something completely identical with itself. So, look, the world will necessarily be different from Allah. Otherwise, the world will be identical to it. Right? So once the world is created, so there is the source, there's the principle, and whatever that is manifestation of it will be necessarily different from it. But not entirely, there's also be likeness in it. So the world will have some likeness and necessary unlikeness. These two, because we are created, basically. There's a separation in a way. There is a differentiation in any act of manifestation and creation. So this also explains why there is evil. So we can extend these principles to their logical conclusions. And I am offering sometimes in the book that type of extensions. Look, once you perceive this, evil becomes a metaphysical necessity too, because the world will necessarily be other than God. The world is we are necessarily other than God. And since God is pure good, absolute good, what is other than it will necessarily have this shadowy quality. If God is pure and absolute light, what is other than it will necessarily be other than that Qūnawī. Therefore, evil emerges necessarily. There is this metaphysical necessity in the very emergence of the evil. And this also explains the principles of transcendence and immanence. There is transcendence. God is unlike anything else. God is لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ, as the Quran puts it. There is nothing like God. And this principles kind of saves Akbarian tradition from falling into a pantheism or panentheism. And I'll explain a little bit more in the following slide. And there is this principle of transcendence, tanzih, as they put it. There is tanzih. But there's also tashbih, which is immanence, likeness. So once you look at the world, you can therefore read divine names. You can therefore read some type of, by studying from this likeness, you can learn about the divine by studying the world, by looking at the world, by studying the nature, by reading the revelation. You can therefore learn about God. You can know about God. And because there is this likeness, necessary likeness. But there's also a necessary unlikeness. Kind of you're bringing the two together because nothing can be that. So this brings us to a conclusion, I believe, in that nothing is devoid of divine presence on the one hand, and nothing can exhaust it on the other. Am I making sense? So the two is always coming together in all beings. Likeness and unlikeness. And there's a verse in the Quran which says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay'un." I already mentioned that. Nothing is like God. There's nothing like God. So this is the main principle, right? Therefore, all Kalam tradition is functioning on the base of this. Ash'ari Kalam, for example, is functioning on the base of this. But the Quran also talks about, for example, wherever you turn, you will see the face of God.
Yeah.
Right? So the Quran seems to be giving us both. On the one hand, it establishes divine transcendence. Nothing is like. Nothing can be therefore God. Nothing can be divinized, even the highest things. And on the other hand, wherever you turn, you will see the face of God. Therefore, you can read, or you can see the face of the divine in all beings, if you know how to read them. So the transcendence and immanence is bringing together. And this is one of the main goals of these type of writings. And he's giving us the metaphysical reason why this is the case. Also opening up new possibilities in the Quranic hermeneutics. How you really, this is the question here. And this, if you are familiar with the tafsir tradition, Quranic exegetical tradition, there are sometimes polarities, sometimes tensions that they are trying to resolve. Say, Laysa kamithlihi shay'un on the one hand, nothing is like that. On the other hand, wherever you turn, you will see the face of God. So how do you really reconcile it? Are you going to prioritize one over the above, over the other? Or are you going to take one of them, Laysa kamithlihi shay'un, like there's nothing like that, as the principal axis, and then you're going to meet this one as a type of an analogy, right? And they're offering a different methodology here, as if they're telling us, since God is beyond all, God is absolutely transcendent, nothing can be devoid of divine presence. Nothing. But this is because of the divine transcendence. I mean, these two are not competing with each other. Transcendence and immanence, likeness and unlikeness, they're not competing with each other. They're in fact necessitating, inviting each other. Therefore, a true tanzih cannot truly be established with tashbih. Or tashbih cannot be protected from anthropomorphism or divinization of the created order without the principle of tanzih. You got to have both. You kind of need to strike that fine balance between the two, between transcendence and immanence. And Akbarian tradition, in my view, they don't see the two, transcendence and immanence, as competing principles. They're seeing them as necessitating principles. The two need each other to reach the perfection of the other. Tanzih cannot be perfect. God cannot be limited to tanzih even. And tashbih cannot be perfect without tanzih. Tanzih cannot be perfected without tashbih. And there's, okay, this is the slide that I was talking about dualism, pantheism, panentheism. Look, another principle is on page 22. He says, in causing the existence of multiplicity, it remains the same. And following principle, something that becomes a locus of manifestation for any truth does not itself become a source of manifestation. Do you see the distinction here? Say, when at Berian tradition, when they talk about the created order as a created being, as a locus of manifestation, they are very well aware that that's not the source of the manifestation. That's not the source of it. We are only a must-have. Kind of, we are being qualified with divine qualities because of this givenness. We are being given. God is necessary in itself, due to itself. God exists due to itself. If we exist due to God.
Okay, can I just ask, because the first statement that in causing the existence of multiplicity, it remains itself, is not, I don't think, controversial for anyone. It's the second one, something that becomes a locus of manifestation. Is this term manifestation, can you think of other ways of expressing that in English? Because manifestation implies it's not incarnation in the Christian sense, I get that. Yeah. But it might be moving in that direction where, you know, God becomes the divine and the word became flesh. I know that's not what you're saying, and the Quran's not saying that.
I think
but there's a distant rumbling of that at the back of my mind, that you have this sense of the locus manifests itself. I mean, sorry, the names manifest themselves. There's a kind of an echo of that in my mind. Can you reassure me that that's not what's happening, or maybe it is what's happening?
That's not the case.
Okay.
I think the divinization of the world is really truly misunderstanding Akbarian theology in a radical way, I think one can say. Look, I think nothing is further than what they're trying to say here. Look, let's say this is the starting point. God exists due to itself, right? God exists, the real exists due to himself.
Aseity, God's aseity.
Yeah, and we all exist due to Allah, right?
Right. Okay.
We all exist due to Allah. Hence, there is this absolute need and poverty that describes the created order. You know, what describes us better than anything else is our ajz and faqr. One of the most frequently told stories in the Futuhat of Ibn Arabi is the following. One day, Bayazid al-Bistami, this famous sage of the early era, he prays to Allah and he says, what is the best possible way to come to you, to find you, to get closer to you? There's a prayer. And this prayer is answered. I don't know how, but perhaps in a dream, or perhaps he heard a noise. I don't know that part. But the answer is, come to me with your ajz and faqr, with your poverty and need. And those things, they don't belong to me, they belong to you. So what they mean by this, what defines us better than anything else, this created order, me and you, is our poverty, our need, absolute need to Allah.
Yeah. Okay.
This absolute need is established first.
Yeah.
This absolute need. Without Allah, we are nothing.
Yeah.
And but once you get closer to your ajz and faqr, you're also getting closer to divine presence. And there's this, again, a necessity between the two. The closer you get to your own need to Allah, the closer you get to divine presence.
Right.
So, as if declaration of the nothingness of the world, really, the declaration of that nothing can be divine, is leading them to these conclusions. It's not that they're divinizing the world. Far from that. They're actually describing the world in its absolute need, in its absolute faqr and ajz. Therefore, they are reaching to these conclusions. So it's farther from truth. I mean, it's not a pantheism or a panentheism, therefore. Look, I think when we usually when we talk about and when we imagine the relationship between God and the world, we seem to have this picture in mind, as if God is a being here, right? And I'm a being here, right? And God is watching me. God is in relationship to me. That's like according to your theology. If you're a deist, God is not even watching you, right? So there's that type of relationship. We approach this whole relationship between God and the cosmos by starting from some dualistic presumptions. Like Mason and the wall. Like there's wall here and the Mason made it and is watching it, looking at his part and judging it perhaps, witnessing it and knowing about it, that type of thing. So look, there's this relationship that we seem to be imagining when we are talking about the relationship between God and the cosmos, like the sun and the world maybe. I don't know. But there's that type of relationship. Picture in our mind. But look, in the case of Mason and the wall, let's say Mason is gone. The wall is still going to stay here, right? In this relationship. The wall does not really need the Mason to have that sustenance. Right? To have that existence. But this cannot truly be applied to the relationship between God and the cosmos. Once God is gone, nothing remains. Am I making sense? So nothing remains. This relationship cannot be understood between God and the cosmos in this dualistic, more simplistic sense. That's usually the picture we have in mind. But Akbarian theology seems to challenge this, because Akbarian metaphysics seems to challenge it, because on the one hand, you cannot truly draw boundaries to the divine presence, as if God is a being here, right? I'm a being here. We are relating to each other. But you cannot truly draw boundaries around the divine presence. You cannot draw boundaries around the real, because this whole picture is presuming a boundary, as if there are confinement here. But once you say God is infinite, nothing can be outside of it. You cannot step out of it. And therefore, this dualism is gone, really. Yet, since they also established the need of the created order to the divine creation, divine bestowal of wujud, bestowal of existence, they are not elevating its status to a divinity. What defines world is this Quranic verse, actually, and that's also frequently cited in the Akbarian writings, and it is the following: Wallahul Ghaniyu wa antum fuqara, which means God is rich and you are all fakirs, you're all poor. And that is the highest metaphysical principle, truly.
This is in the Quran. So the verse is in the Quran, yeah?
Yeah. Wallahul Ghaniyu wa antum fuqara. So this verse is being read in a metaphysical sense. God is the Ghani, God is the rich, and we are all poor. We are all in need, absolute need. And that cannot be separated from us. This need, we are possible beings, and we are going to remain possible beings, even if we are existentiated. This possibility, this dhati quality, this essential quality, cannot be removed from us. It is an impossibility to remove this possibility from the created order. Hence, nothing can be divinized. Yet, because of this need, because of this ajz and faqr that defines the whole created order, one can feel an overwhelming presence of the divine.
I've just got I've looked up the reference. It's Surah Fatiha. It's 35:15, 35, Surah 35, verse 15. O mankind, you are those in need of Allah, while Allah is free of need, the praiseworthy.
Precisely. This is the highest metaphysical principle that describes everything. And since this is being preserved, but look, we talked about the issue of being an image of God, right? The Quranic tradition is agreeing with this, as if they're telling us we need to assimilate the divine qualities to the extent possible for a human being, right? If God is merciful, let's assimilate this divine quality and be merciful. If God is just, let's assimilate this divine quality and try to be just. So these qualities, these divine names, they're also implying moral qualities. So to the extent you assimilate these qualities, you're getting closer to.
Although God is also the destroyer and so on. So we have to. As humans, we live according to the sunnah rather than by the attributes. Otherwise, we go around doing all sorts of things. Which were
and this is the reading of the sunnah too. Sunnah, the prophetic model, is actually telling us and teaching us how to assimilate these qualities in a balanced and polished manner.
Right.
In the prophetic practice, in the prophetic model, you're gonna see this assimilation, this manifestation of divine qualities in a polished and balanced manner, in a way. Okay, and this is the role of the Sunnah and prophetic model from a metaphysical point of view. But look, although they are telling us that we can be mirrors, we can be locus of manifestation of divine qualities in many places, most of the divine names that we can reflect. But there is one exception. Do you know what that is?
No.
God is
creation.
No. God is due to the real is due to Himself, and we are all due to Him. Self-sufficiency, independence, self-sustenance, and these are divine qualities, and they're only unique to Allah. We cannot copy them. We cannot really assimilate them. We cannot even get closer to them. And these are unique to Allah. So this is distinction. So on the one hand, you're being described as an image of Allah, right? As a mirror, as a locus of manifestation, and that gives you a certain kind of a majesty. It's a very humanitarian view of seeing the world, by the way. It gives you a very high goal to realize, right? On the one hand. But on the other hand, it's also telling you you're, at the end of the day, a being which is defined by need and poverty and ajz and faqr, and these are being established. As if these two Quranic assertions about the human condition, the Quran uses two terms to describe human condition, if you think about it. On the one hand, it says you're a servant, right? Abd. You're a slave, a servant. On the other hand, it uses the word Khalifa. Khalifa means vicegerents, right? This being. So if you think about human hierarchy, it's actually talking about the highest and the lowest points. Right? And the Khalifa and the Sultan and the slave. So as if when the Quran talks about it, on the one hand, it is making a reference to the majesty of the human condition, as in Khalifa, but on the other hand, it is making a reference to its nothingness, its need, as in the case of slave. So the proper perception of the perfection of human condition is bringing the two together. This is the way I read Akbarian perception of human condition. On the one hand, it is telling you you're this majestic being. There's a lot waiting to be realized in you. On the other hand, it is establishing your own need and poverty and telling you you're nothing really. So kind of you're bringing the two ends together and you're standing where they meet. Again, two seas, right? The very notion of barzakh, bringing the two together. Therefore, I can argue, this is not a deism, obviously, because of the immense presence of the divine. Dualism obviously is not, because of there really is no boundaries. Divine infinity knows really no boundaries. There really is no that. Therefore, dualism and deism, I believe, are wrong terms to, and no one did. I'm just mentioning this now there. Is it a type of hulul or ittisal or ittihad? These are some traditional concepts sometimes used to criticize Akbarian doctrines. Sometimes they argued that is Akbarians or Ibn Arabi and his school, are they talking about a certain permeation of God in the beings, right? Or is there a connection as if they're attaching to each other like this, the two beings, right? Or is it a union, ittihad, like as if there are two beings in the beginning and they are undoing it and being one? So these are some models, really, theological models that they are offering. But they seem to be not doing justice to what is going on here. On the one hand, because of this simple reason, I guess. Because to begin with, Akbarian school is not describing the world as if we are starting with two beings here, like being, Mason and the wall analogy, and then as if Mason is permeating into wall, or they're standing together, or they are being one. So as if there's an initial duality, and that is being undone in later stages. But that's not their view, really. And they don't really see the relationship between God and cosmos as if this is the relationship between a being and a being. They see the relationship between God and cosmos, to simplify, between, there's beings, obviously, but God is being defined as being itself. Am I making sense? As being itself. This relationship cannot be understood as if this is a relationship between two beings. One powerful, strong being and another being. Because the primary perception of the divine is not defining God as a being to begin with. And therefore, I think these are not doing justice. Is it a pantheism, you might ask? I mean, if pantheism is a term which declares the divinity of every being, and it is not, therefore, then it is not. Because, as I tried to say, what defines the world is distance from the divinity. I mean, this ajz and faqr, very really, as if this statement, La ilaha illallah, the most fundamental statement of our belief, La ilaha illallah, is being read metaphysically, really, because La ilaha illallah, no God but God, is taking all these divine qualities and giving them to Allah. And whatever good here, whatever divinely that's coming from Allah, that is attributed to Allah, and what defines us here in this part is our ajz and faqr. It's not a declaration of the divinity of the world, as if this phone is a god or something like that. I never heard that, never saw that, as if, but sometimes people voice this. Is the panentheism, one might ask? I think this is the strongest possibility if you think about it. But again, there's a problem here. Because if panentheism means, as in that end, as if the world is in God, right? If this is implying a spatio-temporal relationship, as if there's something and there's a being in another being, right? As if God is being imagined like a being and in the womb of God, and there are some panentheistic analogies like that. So as if the world is in the womb of the divine. And that's obviously is not. Again, we are starting with the distinction between beings and being itself. And these terms, pantheism, panentheism, and similar terms, we also should remember, they are coming from late modern philosophy in Europe. I think pantheism is first used by an Irish philosopher. I can't remember the name now.
Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley, the idealist. Well, he was an Irish philosopher.
No, not him. Someone else. I think this Irish philosopher, I can't remember the name, but he's using the term to define what Spinoza is saying. So to describe Spinoza's idea, he comes up with the term. Spinoza is a pantheist. An Irish philosopher, I can't remember the name.
I would say Spinoza was an atheist, actually, but that's another subject.
But he thinks he's a pantheist, so he came up with the term. And panentheism is emerging from within the German idealism. So these are late terms. I believe none of these terms is doing justice what experience school is telling. And these are quite late, and they all seem to be starting from an initial assumption of perceiving God as a distinct being. Although, albeit the supreme being, but a being still.
I've just found it. John Toland in 1705. The term pantheism was introduced into the English language and popularized by the Irish freethinker and writer John Toland.
That's him. Yes. I forgot the name, but yeah, he's the one. He's the one who used it first. I think he was using it to describe what Spinoza is saying. So he came up with the term.
Yeah.
I think he popularized it. Yeah. So this is my quick take on these models. None of them is really capturing what Sufi metaphysics, especially within the context of Alperian tradition, is trying to tell us.
I think. I mean, you're the expert. I'm not. I think your understanding, your iteration of Akbari metaphysics is not panentheist or pantheist or dualist or deist. I see that. I'm just wondering though if other iterations of Akbarian metaphysics, Sufi metaphysics, are perhaps less carefully articulated. May sometimes slip over into those categories.
I don't know of any one concept which can exhaust, which can describe what's going on here. Perhaps we should come up with one. But it is just what it is. And these terms may be helpful because they seem to be shedding some light on certain parts of it, but they don't give us the whole picture. I mean, one can agree with pantheists for some. If a pantheist is saying there is divine presence in the world, I think one can agree with that, I guess. Yes, God is present in all moments, at each moment one can say. And one can say, as the Quran puts it, I think this is a very Islamic idea too, like nafaktu fihi min ruhi or aqrabu ilayhi min hablil warid, as the Quran puts it, right? God is closer to you than your own jugular vein, right? God is closer to you than your own jugular vein. A jugular vein can be understood as an idiom in Arabic because once you get hit from here or this area, you're going to lose your consciousness. As if God is telling us, the revelation is telling us, God is closer to you than your own consciousness. So there's that type of intimacy between the divine presence and the created order. If the pantheist is trying to tell us this is the case, perhaps we can agree with it, but we don't go to the extent of declaring the divinity of this or that, I guess, if that is what they have in mind. Or panentheists might, one can find some certain points of agreement with a panentheist here and there. But the picture is more than this. As if these terms are trying to describe the elephant, right, by touching the legs or touching the strands or things like that.
So a Hindu metaphor, yeah.
Yeah. It is more than this. I think the proper perception of it should start with a fundamental distinction between beings and being itself. Then it becomes more accessible.
Yes.
Okay, let me look. I was also gonna just give you this short quote. This is from Ibn Arabi, just to support what I just said. Whether existent or non-existent, the world is always in the mode of possibility, while the real is always in the mode of necessity, due to himself. The world has not entered into necessity, but remains in the realm of possibility, needing both a creator and a cause. Apart from this essential distinction, there is no meaningful distance between al-haq and the world. So there's on the one hand this essential distinction, ontological dependence. But yes, they do negate the possibility of being any other distinction between God and the world. Is this making sense? So all other distinctions are undone. Yet this essential distinction, that is that we need Allah. God is due to himself and we are all due to Allah. That cannot be removed. That stays there. I believe not knowing this fundamental conviction is causing misunderstanding. Yes, they seem to be removing all type of special distinction between God and the world on the one hand, and one might then think that, are we going into a pantheism or declaring the divinity of the world, that type of. But this is always together with the emphasis on the possibility of the world. It always stays in a state of possibility.
Can I just ask about this state of this mode of possibility language? Is it another way of saying contingency?
Contingency, yeah. The world's contingency cannot be removed from.
Right. Okay.
It's an impossibility to remove, even by divine creation. It's like so. It's an impossibility to remove this contingency from the world. Hence, from the perspective of Akbarian theology, let's say we're talking about Jesus, right? I mean, one can argue that Jesus is a very comprehensive mirror of the divine qualities, but cannot be divinized. Like in prophets too, they are very comprehensive mirrors, a comprehensive locus of manifestation. They are be really assimilating divine qualities to the extent possible for a human being, and there's that. But none of them can be demonized because of this essential.
I remember the first book I ever read on Islam by Guy Eaton, called Islam, The Destiny of Man. And Guy Eaton was certainly a disciple of René Guénon and Said Nasser and all them. He quotes, I forget who it was, it may have been Ibn Arabi, it might have been Al-Ghazali, but anyway, talking about Christians and how they've been confused. They saw, if you like, the divine names or whatever manifest in Jesus and confused him with God. And they worshipped him instead of the source of these qualities in God himself. So it's basically a confusion. So what Christians are is understandable, but it's misdirected. And Islam is the corrective of that.
Precisely. I think, since you mentioned, we can read John's first verses alongside with this. Now, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and Word was God's statements.
Yeah.
So I think from the perspective of Islamic theology, not only Akbarian metaphysics, but from the perspective of Islamic theology, one can agree with them. Perhaps the first two statements. Because in the beginning was the Word, right? If the Word, if Kalam, if Quran, and there are a lot of discussions within the Islamic theology about the createdness or uncreatedness of the Quran. And the general Sunni position is to declare the Quran is an uncreated document, perhaps expressed in created language, but in itself is uncreated.
Yeah.
I think we can agree with that statement, therefore. In the beginning was the Word, if that means co-eternity of the Word with God. In fact, in terms of ayan sabite, in terms of divine knowledge, there's also a co-eternity of the whole beings with God. Because divine knowledge does not know a beginning. It's not like God didn't know and then started to know. So therefore, omniscience in God is eternal too. In a way, in terms of our presence, in terms of our subud, in the divine knowledge, there's also eternity in us too. Yet, so therefore, I think in the beginning was the Word, can be agreed upon. And the other one, the Word was with God. Again, if this a reference to a co-eternity of the Word with God, I think we can agree. But this last statement is a problem. The Word was God's statement. It's a jump. And from the Islamic point of view, if something is depending on something higher, it cannot be demonized. Is that making sense? So because there's that dependence relationship. However, exalted or supreme that thing is, that logos, however you want to call it, it cannot be demonized because there's dependence. There is ajz and faqr that defines its nature. Only the necessary one, only the one who is due to itself, the absolute, will be called as divine. So this whole perfect human doctrine, therefore, what is the perfect human? Is the final cause and ultimate being, is also the point of confluence between the cosmic and the divine seeds. The mirror of two stations, one of possibility and the one of necessity. First, I can just very briefly say a few words about this too. There's this comprehensiveness in human nature, the perfect human, and the word that is used to describe this is gem. And astonishment is a very, very important term too, to understand Akbari metaphysics as it is formulated in the Miftah. Astonishment is a term which means, so how do we know God, right? Astonishment is bringing together these two. On the one hand, there is clarity, certainty. Because if God is being itself, right? God as being itself cannot not be known. If God is being itself is known before anything else, really. So there is this tendency towards this clarity. And there are a lot of sayings, by the way, within the Sufi tradition, and that is being repeated by someone like Ibn Sina. People also know this theory as Burhan al-Sadiqi, also in Ibn Arabi's writings, and here we see it again. God is known before anything else. God is more evident than all the proofs. So our usual theological movement is from the proofs to the proven, right? From Dalil to the Madlul. So we are going from the proofs to God. And that is acceptable, and the Quran also teaches us to do that. But there's another way too. Knowing God in His own manifestness. If God is hidden due to this manifestness. The Quranic verse, God is Awwal and Akhir, God is the beginning, the first and the last, and the outward, the inward, from Akbarian perspective is actually teaching us this. God is the outward and the inward. On the one hand, hidden, but on the other hand, manifest. When the Quran puts this outward, Zahir means it is known, it is apparent, it's clear. The al-Batin means it is inward, cannot be exhausted, it's hidden. So, as if they're trying to reach to this state, knowing God in His manifestness, but also in His hiddenness. Therefore, there's this certainty here when it comes to divine presence. But on the other hand, there's this astonishment, there's this inability to exhaust it. Am I making sense? This Hayra is bringing these two states together. Clarity and inability. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ will be seen as the absolute model of a perfect human, the most comprehensive mirror of the divine qualities, and most polished and balanced of them. And his Sunnah is teaching us how to actually bring this to get down to earth, as if in his practicality. It is teaching us how to navigate this complexity while staying attached to the divine, to God, to Allah. And the prophetic model is necessary, kind of embodying the whole preaching. And this road is open to us too, and perhaps they're just giving us a model, a goal waiting to be realized in their theory of perfect human. And I also would argue there are a lot of implications, possible implications of these teachings, and some of them will be done in Miftah by Qūnawī and his following students and to this day. But I believe there are a lot of areas one can still discover. I'm trying to do my, if you remember in our first meeting actually, when we were talking about religion and science issue, causality. In that meeting, I spoke about how to perceive this whole issue of whole debate between religion and science from the perspective of Aquarian tradition. So there's an applicability, almost, I mean, it's still a living tradition, I want to say. It can be a living tradition, perhaps not to the extent one hopes to, yet there are a lot of possibilities of application of these doctrines, these teachings, to our situation. And I'm doing that in that book, and when I'm trying to understand this whole issue of causality and how to resolve the tension between religion and science from within this perspective. I think more can be done, but prophetology then will be a part of this issue. And the Prophet ﷺ and reading of the prophetic stories. Ibn Arabi's Fusus is a form of prophetology, and every chapter starts with a name of a prophet, if you know the text. The human condition will be defined, the spiritual path will be enriched, also will be disciplined too. Sufism sometimes can be so arbitrary. One of the things Qūnawī is trying to do here, actually, while offering this metaphysical teaching, is to provide you a guide which can also help you in your spiritual journey. Because it's a science. It's not an arbitrary chaos. And I think one of the unfortunate things that happened in later centuries is the severance of Sufism from this high metaphysical doctrines and thoughts. Morality and cosmic order, causality and geology, even politics, one can argue, and theodicy and eschatology, I can extend the list. And for all of these, there are studies and more can be done. But it's an all-encompassing philosophy and metaphysics. So it's almost 2 hours. It's been almost 2 hours now.
It has literally been 2 hours, exactly 2 hours.
Yeah, I have a few more slides if you want me to continue.
It's up to you. I'm happy to continue, but I don't want to exhaust you.
Okay, let me finish then these slides.
Okay.
And so, a metaphysics of reconciliation. So the real has never manifested himself twice in the same form to one or two individuals. So what I say when I say metaphysics of reconciliation, I'm talking about this tendency within the school to bring together these poles. I'm giving you an example here. On the one hand, they say things like manifestation does not repeat itself. So this world is a never-ending change. It's a very dynamic worldview.
Yeah.
It never repeats itself. Nothing ever repeats itself because of the divine infinity.
Mm-hmm.
Divine infinity, to say divine infinity is to say all possibilities, and they are going to be realized. So this world is in a constant flux, if you will. And this is going to bring you to someone like a Parmenides, I guess, right? He also talks about process philosophy, and ever-changing. But on the other hand, they're also telling us there are fixed entities, right? Everything is fixed in divine knowledge. God knows and creates, existentiates what he knows. In the divine knowledge, there can't be change. Otherwise, that is going to attribute some type of ignorance, I guess, to the divine. That cannot be accepted. So everything is eternally present in the divine knowledge. Now, that implies a very heavy degree of constancy in the world as well. Look, what they do is to bring the two together. As if in this very moment that we are talking now, right? From one perspective, this was going to happen. Look, it was known since the beginning, from the eternally known. This very moment that we are experiencing, this was eternally known. But on the other hand, we are experiencing it here and now in a state of change and flux, as if this constancy and change, they're brought together. This, as if you're bringing together Heraclitus and the Parmenides, right? What is this, right? Parmenides or Heraclitus, one cannot really swim in the same river twice, that type of stuff. So as if this process and constancy are brought together within this larger metaphysical framework. And things like this also can be said for other major issues, such as likeness and unlikeness. I already spoke about this. There is likeness in this world, but there is also necessary unlikeness. And change and constancy. We spoke about it, temporality and eternity. Now, what this moment that we're experiencing, yes, we're experiencing in a state of temporality, here and now, but there's also something about this moment that is eternal. Necessity and freedom, therefore, because everything existed in the divine knowledge and will be realized as they exist in the divine knowledge, yet that doesn't exclude our freedom. As if they're trying to bring together these poles and give us a metaphysic of reconciliation. That's a very important aspect of this whole metaphysical structure. And also it leads us to morality, because in this case, to know the divine names, you need to actually assimilate and be qualified with them. Say, you want to know what mercy is, you need to be merciful. Am I making sense? Because the divine names are not just concepts now, are not just some ritualistic tools. They are ontological categories. The distance between morality and ontology is no longer. Therefore, the way you are is going to affect how you know. As I tried to say here, to be is to know, really. Being merciful is to know what mercy is. And to know is to be. And also it leads us to a very high degree of metaphysics of love. And this is going to be expressed and improved by following students of his. Metaphysics of love, why do I say this? Yes, truly, God is the lover and the beloved. And on the other hand, truly, from the perspective of Aquarian metaphysics, the source of everything is love in a way. What do they mean by this? Look, here we are, right? And as created beings, can we offer anything back really to God? I mean, God is already complete, right? God is already actual and perfect, utmost perfection. We cannot add anything to God. Yet we are here. It is all pure generosity. Here we are. All beings are, it's a pure generosity really. This very act of existentiation, bestowal of wujud upon possibilities, it is an act of pure generosity. And this can be traced back to divine compassion and love. Therefore, wherever there is existence, wherever there is being, there is also love and generosity. As if this is the real ground. I mean, yeah, I know there are a lot of ugly things in the world. There are a lot of dark things in the world, I know. Yet, the real ground, the absolute real ground of everything is this. Being itself, which is being shared, being given to all possibilities, is an act of love. And therefore, that is the ultimate absolute ground. Therefore, he's both the lover and the beloved. With that, they mean, yes, God is the lover, the real lover. Say, when I love someone like you, or love me back, when we love other beings, where do we think this love is coming from? I mean, we borrow it from the divine love, kind of being mirrors of it and assimilate it. Therefore, we can love other beings. But the source is the divine love, and God is the real lover. But also the beloved. Whatever I love. No, I may be loving this coffee, or I may be loving this car, I may be loving this house. Whatever I love, I love the beauty in it, and which can be traced back to divine being.
Mm-hmm.
And in every being we love, we glimpse the divine. We glimpse the divine presence. In a way, we love anything. We cannot truly love anything without that type of glimpse. As if you're looking at the moon, and this is an example sometimes used in this literature. You're looking at the moon, right?
Yes.
Let's say you don't know the sun, or you're stuck in the night, and you're seeing the moon, and there's that light, and you're falling in love with the moon. To use poetic language, you're falling in love with the moon. And
that by the way, is what I think I read in that book by Guy Eaton, or one of the things that the Christians fell in love with the reflection of the divine in Jesus and confused Jesus with God. They find some deformation of so they mistook the one for the other. They mistook the moon, the reflection on the moon, for the sun itself, and started worshipping the moon instead of the sun, meaning the origin of the light, which is God himself. And this is the fundamental thing that's gone wrong with Christian spirituality.
So in your love of the moon, I mean, your love of the sun is already intrinsic. I mean, because you love that light on the space. The sun by itself is just a rock. I mean, I'm sorry, the moon is just is but a rock.
Yeah.
And when it reflects that beautiful light, it owes it to the source, the real source. And in love of the moon, the love of the sun is intrinsic, whether you know it or not. That's the part that's important. Yeah. So whether you know it or not, consciously or unconsciously, we all love God. We may not know this. We may not be, we need to wake up to this, but whatever you see as beautiful, that beautiful quality can be traced back to divine beauty. And
but the Quran still condemns idolatry, so we worship the creature rather than God. However reflecting in the divine names a creature may be, to worship that creature is morally culpable. It's not just, you misunderstood.
It is. It's not
innocent. It's not innocent.
Precisely. This forgetfulness is the greatest sin. This ignorance is the sin. This forgetfulness. I mean, when I say everybody loves Allah, consciously or unconsciously, yes, the problem here in this world, the problem is this forgetfulness. That's probably why the term zikr, remembrance, is the solution. I mean, remembering, the term itself implies something. Right? When you remember something, you don't know something new. I mean, when you remember something, you go back to what you already know, what you already have.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Quran describes itself as a remembrance, as zikr,
reminder,
perhaps there may be an allusion to this too.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that's the problem. That ignorance is the problem. That's not being as if you're waking up to what is already there. Within this context, of course, I'm talking about. And this is, I was also going to touch on this, but I think I should stop here. It's been too long. And let's finish with this Quranic verse. The first and the last, and the outward, the inward. That seems to be the guiding principle, what they're aiming to realize with their own metaphysical structure. A true understanding of this, knowing God as the first, but also last, but the outward and the inward.
Gosh. Okay, I'll remove that. Thank you for that exhausting but utterly fascinating, enthralling and interesting presentation, Dr. Özgür. Very interesting. I think people watching this will have watched it in segments, unless they're especially strong, which is a great way of doing it, coming back refreshed after half an hour or something. I know a lot of people, Blogging Theology Academy, for example, of the students will be very interested to watch this. Sheikh Hassan Spikey himself will want to see it, I'm sure, and others, of course. So this is immensely interesting. Whether or not we agree with everything that has been said, I'm not going to. I'm just going to assimilate as much as I can and reflect before anything else. It's been an immensely intellectually interesting and rewarding experience. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity, Paul.
And in the description below, you will find various links. Not quite sure what they will be, but they will be there when this goes on live on YouTube to follow up what you've heard. Links to the book, of course, which has been published earlier this year, and any other resources or helpful links that Dr. Özgür will deem worthy to go on the description. So have a look at those. And I'm going to go off now, have a cup of tea. You have your American cup of coffee, of course. Until next time, inshallah, we will come back and discuss your forthcoming book on Kant and Ibn Arabi, which I can't wait to read, inshallah. So good luck with that. Best wishes with that.
Thank you.
Okay, until next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.